Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Stack String Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Daniel DeBrocke, and today we've got a special guest, Chad Wesley Smith. So first off, Chad, thanks so much for jumping on, man. It's great to have you here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Can you give just a brief introduction of who you are and a little bit about your background, just for people who maybe aren't familiar with your work?
Yeah, so as an athlete, um, started off college shot putter, two-time national champion in the NAIA. Threw the shot put 1942 in college, 63 feet 10 inches, and then 20.00 meters, 65 feet 7 inches as a post-collegiate. Um, did my last track meet in May 2010, and then my first powerlifting meet in October 2010. In powerlifting, I finished by totaling 23.25, 1,055 kilos in wraps in the super heavyweight category. Best lifts of a 970, 440 kilo squat, 257.5 kilo, 567 pound bench, and 370 kilo, 815 pound deadlift. Also was 2012 North American Strongman Champion. So earned my pro status in strongman. And then on the other side of things, as a coach and business person, founded Juggernaut Training Systems in 2009 as a sport performance coaching facility here in Orange County, California. Have coached on the sport performance side, which is really my real background, professional MMA fighters, NFL players, Olympians for shot put, hammer throw, bobsled, consulted for track and field teams, collegiate and international track and field teams for sprinters and throwers, all kind of athletes, volleyball players, soccer, swimming, basketball, everything. But probably most noted as a powerlifting coach. I coached two 1,000-pound raw with wrap squatters. Maybe personally, like one-on-one coaching, like 7 or 8 800-pound plus squatters, 800-pound plus deadlifters. Written books like co-authored Scientific Principles of Strength Training, wrote Powerlifting Program Design Manual, Juggernaut Method, and then developed not the coding side, but the coaching logic side, the Juggernaut AI app, which has had right now about 10,000 active users, everyone from beginners all the way to multiple 800 plus pound squatters and deadlifters and that as well.
Awesome. And so actually it's funny because like a lot of the times when people ask me about like some good primer books for getting into strength training and stuff like that, those are two of the top ones that I recommend. I'm like, read this one, the Scientific Principles of Strength Training, and then Powerlifting Program Manual. Because I feel like that's like pretty, they do a really good job at covering a lot of the fundamentals, like from basic level, even honestly to advanced. Like a lot of that stuff, like I still use with a lot of my higher level athletes as well. Like it's pretty solid work. So if you
Thank
guys
you.
haven't checked that out, definitely make sure you go get them. And they're very inexpensive from what I remember anyways.
Yeah, especially with scientific principles, like that's something we try and do in everything. Is it's principle based information, so it's not for beginner, intermediate, or advanced because those principles
Yeah.
apply regardless. It's just understanding the context of specificity and individual differences and how to apply them, and that's really what the majority of our work now with like Juggernaut AI and stuff is based upon, to help people get out of the idea that this is a beginner program and an intermediate program or an advanced program, because all the programs are going to should be utilizing the principles. Just the kind of the magnitude or dosage of the different aspects are what changes based on those individual differences, like experience among others.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I know you're definitely mostly known as like a powerlifting coach or strength coach, but I know a large portion of your athletes, as you kind of mentioned, are not in the strength world necessarily. And so one of the things that I've always noticed is that there are things that sort of permeate like strength based sports that will come off as like, oh, this is this new thing. And it's like, no, I mean, athletes have been using this for forever in like track and field and stuff like that. So like velocity is one that probably became pretty popular in the last couple of years, but then that's been something that's been used for a long time in other sports. And so I remember several years ago, I started looking out into different, I guess more, quote unquote, sport coaching. And it was pretty surprising how much stuff there was out there that kind of changed how I saw things as a powerlifter or as a powerlifting coach. And I was just kind of wanting to get your feedback on how your athletic background and how your exposure to all these different sports actually changed how you see things as a coach. Even though you're programming for powerlifters and that's a lot more specific, what are some influences that kind of changed your perspective and your approach to coaching?
Yeah. So of course, you use the word specific in there, and specificity, scientific principle number one, is going to be what creates this framework around all your other decision-making processes. So being able to understand what the context of specificity really means for these different sports, which we define as developing the underlying systems of success in a given sport, is really important. So, powerlifting really is a extremely simple sport in comparison to training for like track and field or football or MMA, because there's only one quality you're trying to develop in these three pretty simple tasks: squat, bench, and deadlift. So I think dealing with the coaching in the other sports, one, got me exposed to just a much broader pool of knowledge and sources of information much earlier. I started coaching professionally, in the sense of I got paid to coach when I was 19 years old. I started coaching high school football and track then, and I was like super into West Side, but then also simultaneously into my own track and field training. So talking to sprint coaches and throws coaches, and because I was, very good at the shot put, I got to be at these big meets with really well-known coaches. So talking to guys who coached multiple Olympians, and I'd always just really been into it. I started writing my own program at the start of high school when I was 14 years old, but never really had a coach. We didn't have a strength coach at the high school or anything. So I'd just be at these track meets and I'd talk to the coaches who I knew were good coaches, who had a lot of good throwers, and kind of tell them like, I'm doing my own thing. Like, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? And I was never shy about pestering them, with questions. And the same through the college recruiting process, getting to talk to these different coaches and just understand training, I think, from a more holistic, broad view, and see that like, oh, okay, these track and field coaches have something to offer, because this is similar about the sports, and then these physical therapists have something to offer, and these weightlifting coaches have something to offer, rather than kind of getting myopic or pigeonholed into just powerlifting. But in terms of people who have been really big influences to me, as I mentioned, I was really into West Side, and even though I'm probably one of the more noted anti-West Side people out there now, I'd say that Louis Simmons had to be a big influence on me. Really, I mean, just getting me passionate about it, and the way that they, even though I don't think he went about a lot of things the right way in the context of powerlifting or sport training, he was trying to be critical in the way that he analyzed the training that they did. So that was big. Joe DeFranco was a huge influence early on for me, the biggest inspiration in starting Juggernaut. Then I'd say the people who are probably making the biggest impact on my own coaching philosophies now are James Smith, you may know as The Thinker, as a writer for Elite FTS. I'm not sure if he writes there at all. He's got his own company now, Global Sport Concepts. I had the good fortune to employ James for about a year back in 2011 to 2012. And that, for me, as a guy with a degree in history, was my master's and master's plus. James is just a super smart coach who, he worked in like translating some Veroshansky texts and all that stuff. So all those books that people talk about, oh, you got to read Super Train, you got to read Science and practice of strength training, and every coach says it, but like I'm very dubious of how many of them actually understand it, or understand how to practically apply it. But seeing James put into practice those ideas from Russian translated texts, it all became a lot simpler to me, because where the words on the page are written in this very complex way, the output of the programs that he was creating were pretty simple and intuitive. And being able to sit and talk with him daily about why they were doing that helped me so much better understand that information, as well as, so I can, through James, like Dr. Bondarchuk and all the specific or special strength stuff, really helpful through there, as well as the training from Charlie Francis, a infamous Canadian sprint coach. It all became a lot simpler and more intuitive through my work with James. Then Dr. Mike Israetel from Renaissance Periodization also been very helpful in really helping me take a lot of things that I was doing intuitively or through the work I'd done with James, and just kind of create a more structured academic framework around it through scientific principles of strength training. Things that I was doing, and then he's like, "Oh, this is you're doing a really good job with phase potentiation." I was like, "I didn't know that it's called that, but thank you." And then being able to understand it better and how to apply it to all these different people. So I'd say those two were really big on how I actually coach on the day to day now.
Mhm. Yeah, it's funny actually, because exactly what you kind of pointed out with super training and a lot of Eric Shansky's work and Bondarchuk, all that stuff. There are a lot of people who will say, "Oh, if you want to learn about this stuff, read these books." And so I read those books, and I remember, I think that timing is pretty important. So I read them when I didn't really know a lot, and so I was like, okay, I understand what all these words mean in isolation, but then together I have no fucking clue what you're trying to say.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I went back several years later and read them again, and I was like, oh, okay. And I'm sure that if I go back in another couple of years and read them again, then it's like, oh, and it just keeps expanding. So it's like, I really don't think that a lot of those books are very accessible to most people unless you've got quite a bit of experience, because even like, I mean, the term strength, right? Like if you explain strength as a skill, most people, if you don't have like a decent amount of experience, won't really know what that means. And then you try and explain to them, they're like, okay, I kind of get it, but then they don't necessarily understand the broader implications of it. And then you look at a book like that that's just very, very dense, or I guess those types of books, and they're very dense, and they do take a lot of practical experience to really understand, I guess, sort of the context that they're speaking in.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of funny because, yeah, I don't know. When people ask me like for books, I'm always like, the RP books, your books, Eric Helm's books, I'm like, those ones are real simple. They're like really good, really accessible, and you get really, really good results from them. That's a great starting point for me.
I think, I really credit Dr. Mike is extremely gifted in his ability to take complex information and deliver it in a way that's digestible without degrading the real message behind it. There's people a lot of people, they end up oversimplifying things, and he simplifies things without taking away the true essence and nuance of what it's saying. And that's a very challenging thing to do.
Yeah. No, he does a really good job of that as well. And so actually it's funny because I was going to ask you what type of resources and books and stuff like that you'd recommend, but sounds like you already kind of gave quite a few. So one of the things that I wanted to know as well, actually, is what's like a particular area in sports science, or maybe it's not necessarily even sports science, but something that's related to like athletic performance, I guess, that you find you're becoming more and more interested in as of late.
Yeah, the training that's kind of most fun and interesting for me to learn about is still definitely the sport performance training, and kind of reconceptualizing what athleticism means. Earlier in my career, I started doing this when I was 19. I'm 36 now. I definitely only thought of like This guy's a great athlete because he can run fast and jump high and lift a lot. And even early in my strength and conditioning career with Juggernaut, I'd have these football players and then also some MMA fighters and jiu-jitsu guys. And the MMA guys and jiu-jitsu guys, they couldn't run fast or jump high or lift a lot for the most part. So I always sort of considered them a little less than on the athleticism side of things than football players and the guys who could do that stuff. And then, particularly once I started training jiu-jitsu and then doing some just for fun striking training, Muay Thai type of stuff, it really got me thinking like, man, these guys are extremely athletic. It's just different. And then as you have these, even people in mainstream sports like football, even though he's having a terrible year, I'll still use him as an example, like a Russell Wilson, who isn't that fast or that quick or anything or that explosive by measurement with a stopwatch or a Vertec or a tape measure, but he's got this quote unquote like innate ability of elusiveness and all that stuff, and understanding what that timing and rhythm and coordination and how that impacts true athletic success, or Jerry Rice is a great example of this, Tim Brown, Chris Carter, guys who weren't 4.40 guys, but you watch them play or watch the highlights and like, well, no one's catching them. They look super fast, and they play super fast because of this ability to anticipate what is going to happen through, if you read like the Sports Gene and talk about vision and reaction, and how reaction is a very low trainable quality. So it's not that great players in football and basketball and stuff are reacting to what they're seeing as much as they're predicting what they're going to see based on all the things that they've seen before, and the ability to quickly visually process that and then kind of organize their body rapidly and make the adjustments needed to that situation. So guys who I see putting out a lot of cool information about that are like Max Schmarzo, Stronger by Science. I always get his and Greg Knuckles mixed up. Corey Schlesinger is the strength coach for the Phoenix Suns. Does a lot of cool stuff with that. All these different contract, relax exercises where he's kind of like dancing with the kettlebell. They both have a lot of cool stuff like that. One of my great friends, Dustin Perry, is the strength coach for the 49ers. Just the way that he has taken scientific principles of strength training and used it for his football players, and creating the specificity. What does it mean to be specific for every position group, and then how do individual differences get applied within the locker room there, when for like Juggernaut AI, our individual differences are going from 18-year-old lightweight women to 40-year-old super heavyweight men. We've got 65-year-olds using it, and every lightweights, heavyweight, everyone in between. But within the context of an NFL locker room, it's like, all right, well, all your offensive linemen, they're all big, they're all 6'3" plus, 290 plus. But how do we fine tune things for a guy who's been in the league for 10 years versus 2 years? For this guy who's pretty fast twitch versus this guy who's a bit slower, for guys with this injury history versus that one. So yeah, seeing the real detailed stuff of sport performance coaching is always something that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I also feel like once you get to that sort of more homogenous sample size, I guess, it becomes a little bit more tricky because there's way less levers to pull. Like if you have an athlete who's, like you said, a lightweight, who's pretty young and a female or whatever, versus someone who's maybe a little older and probably, let's say, 100, 120 kilos, you've got a lot of different levers that you can pull between the two of them. But then if everyone's just kind of the same, you're kind of like, oh, okay, well, there's definitely not as much stuff that you have to kind of lean on, I guess.
Yeah, the nuance is a lot smaller. And it's also interesting, and Dustin and I will kind of joke about it, how it doesn't matter as much. So I think, the better the athletes get, like no one's going from NFL, bench warmer to all pro because you put 50 pounds on their bench press. Like it's much more, all right, how do I do the weight room stuff, the strength coach stuff enough without taking away from their technical, tactical training with their position coaches, the football coaches. How do I support that stuff and not get just wrapped up in the way you see so many coaches do, and more so at the high school and collegiate levels, hopefully, than the pro levels of, I've got this many guys who bench 400 pounds and this many guys who squat 500 pounds. But, you get around that enough, it's rare to see that like the best weight room guy is also the best player, and understanding the real reasoning behind that, why that is almost always the case, I think is important to understanding what athleticism really is.
Yeah, and that's getting a little out of my wheelhouse as well. I've coached a handful of people. That was also quite a while ago, and it's definitely not something that I'd be comfortable taking on. Anytime I get someone who reaches out to me, I'm like, I should probably talk to this person instead. But in terms of, I guess if we kind of come back to more strength training, I know one thing that you have kind of been known for, I guess, is your peaking strategies, and getting, I think, if I remember correctly, you get like 7 to 10% or something like that.
Yeah, for my own powerlifting career, I averaged about 7.5% higher in competition than in training.
Mm-hmm. So I've always gotten a fair bit out of my peak as well. But I was wondering if you could kind of go over, I guess, your thought process of how you structure a peak in a way where people can, well, to kind of take it a step back, a lot of the times people will hit their biggest numbers in the gym, and then they just kind of shit the bed on the platform, or they just match it, or maybe they barely chip it. And so what are some of the common mistakes you see when people are peaking and having those experiences? And then also, what's your sort of thought process from like more of a principled approach to actually take an athlete to perform best on the platform when it actually matters most?
Yeah. So effective peaking starts before the peak, starts before the peaking block, before the taper. It's got to be contextualized within the entire training cycle. So I think the reasons that I was able to be successful in that was that I was doing a lot of volume earlier, in general and strength blocks, a lot of volume in those. So I had a big reserve of volume to pull away from as I got into the peak, to be able to decay fatigue as I head into the meet. If you're always training really high intensity and low volume, well, when you get to the peak, like how do you peak if there's nothing to take away? There's no, if you've only been doing 3 work sets and like, okay, now I'm going to do 2, like it's just not as big a change. Where early blocks, I might be doing 16 sets of squats in a week. So, we get down to peaking, and then I maybe have 5 or 6 like overloading sets in a week. It's a really significant change. So that is also, that to that same effect is I'm doing a lot of my training probably carrying more fatigue. I was doing a lot of my training carrying more fatigue than other people were, because I was not concerned with lifting the most I could in the gym for Instagram video, a YouTube video, or whatever. And I had a lot of trust in this process that I could do that and then perform well at meets. So having that big reserve of volume, training in a more fatigued state, training in a more even keel, and this is a bit of personality differences for everyone, I'd say, but I'm pretty mellow, and I train by myself a lot of times as well. So having the arousal of trying to go crazy in the gym to hit this big number wasn't something I was wanted to do or was interested in doing. I was trying to kind of do the number I knew I needed to do in with the least fanfare possible, because through my entire athletic career, going back to throwing the shot put, if I threw 60 feet in practice, I knew I was going to throw 62 or 63 in the meet, and that wasn't even like a peaking situation. That was like I could throw 60 on Thursday and 63 on Saturday type of thing, week after week. And so I kind of that was always my expectation. Like, you do better in competitions than in practice. So when I started powerlifting, my first meet in 2010, the first meet that I'd ever been to, I did the juggernaut method as it was in the original book. And I just kind of expected to do that. I squatted 765 in training. I squatted 800 at the meet. Okay, that makes sense to me. Other people were surprised, I guess, by how that happened. So I think that's the other part of it is I'm saving extra adrenaline, arousal, whatever, for the competition. So I think that those probably three things are the biggest factors towards it. Because if you don't train with that bigger volume early on and do so with the understanding, if I tested my 1 rep max today, it wouldn't be as high as I want it to be, but I don't care because I don't need it to be that high. Like you can't always be peaked, and there's no surprise powerlifting meets. It's not like, powerlifting commissioner is like, test your max right now, or, world championship is tomorrow, so you better be ready. No, you don't have to be that. We know when the meets are. You get to plan it all. So, intentionally kind of digging down for a bigger foundation, whatever, so we can build a higher, a higher skyscraper with it. I think that's probably the most important idea to the effective peaking, and trusting in that process, that even though, I kind of feel like beat up in this phase of things, it's going to be there when I need it. It's going to be there when I need it. I think that's really valuable. So then as you get into the peaking and you're able to, pull back some volume, you've got volume, you've got that reserve to take away from. And like each of those weeks, you're going to feel better. And then as you get into the taper, I was taking like a 2-week taper, but still being really active during that taper. I think that's a mistake that a lot of people make. Certainly when I started powerlifting and I was getting advice from more old school equipped powerlifters, and they're like, no, just take the whole week off, don't do anything. And then I did that before, and I still did fine, but I ended up feeling way better when I'd be doing the light sessions and technique session type of stuff, and using that as like a visualization, deep practice, as well as just getting the blood flow from that, and kind of more being an athlete. Like, get football players, track guys, they don't sit on their ass for a week before a competition. They train, but lighter, like strategically lighter. So I think that's a big mistake that people make is they don't do enough work, and it doesn't have to be hard, but doing some work through that taper process is really significant. It's like, for me, real quick, like in the squat, going through this is my career of meets: 765 in training, 800 in the meet, 805 in training, 865 in the meet, 825 in training, 905 in the meet. Then I had a time kind of powerlifting and strongman together. Then when I came back to just powerlifting, this is post some herniated discs, I think I went 825 in training, 937 at that meet. I know I opened at that meet higher than the heaviest weight I had done. And I'd missed 840 in that training cycle, and then opened at 838. And then squatted 937. Then the next one, 863 in training, 959 in the meet, 915 in training, 970 in the meet. And then my last meet, I squatted 948 in training, and then had like a muscle belly tear in my quad and a back down set from that. So I was not able to realize what I think would have been 1,014 or something. But yeah, so all pretty much with the exception of that last one with the injury, very, very significant improvements, several times opening higher than what the heaviest weight I did in training was. And I think it was mostly that, training with a lot of volume, training in a relatively fatigued state, training calm, letting the adrenaline arousal be there at the meet, trusting this whole process. I think those are sort of bigger principal ideas that I could give people rather than like, oh, you want to reduce volume by this percentage type of thing. That's going to be maybe beyond the scope of what I could talk about here. But if they want to read the powerlifting program design manual, they could check that out.
No, I think that's great advice. And so volume is another one that I guess I've kind of heard people talk about in a variety of different ways. But one of the things that I've definitely noticed that I'm a huge proponent of now is just improving your general aerobic fitness. So like whether it's going for walks, a lot of people just usually get going for walks. But if I have like someone who's quite advanced, we need to really push their volume, I'll usually get them doing some sort of conditioning as well. That I was wondering if you could kind of touch on that in terms of actually helping people sort of progress to being able to tolerate enough of this sort of total volume when you are in more of like hypertrophy block away. So you kind of set that foundation, establish a really wide base to eventually peak up to this big new number.
Yeah, I think people they skip the conditioning part because it's easy to make an excuse about like, oh, this isn't specific or whatever, because it's hard or it's not fun to do is the real reason they don't want to do it. But it's not about the context of, is this going to make you lift more tomorrow? Is it going to allow you to do more training, to stay healthier, to lift more over the long term. So because very much in that short term, if you're doing nothing right now, if you just lift weights, you don't do anything, and then you start walking 20 minutes a day, for the first week, maybe, it'd be like, you're going to get in a squat workout, oh, my legs feel a little heavy or whatever. Yeah. After like a week, you're going to be fine. The more intense or, a little bit more demanding things, if you're pushing the sled or doing an air bike or a rower or something like that, might take a little bit longer to accommodate to, but it's not going to be too long. So, having a very general off-season type of phase where you're understanding, all right, I'm taking one step back to take two steps forward and handling more moderate weights, that it doesn't matter if your legs feel a little bit heavy because you were riding the bike or whatever means that you like. Having that phase, I think, is hugely important. That's one of the biggest mistakes of my own powerlifting career, is not having planned, dedicated off-season phases. They became more unplanned because I try and go one meet cycle into the next, and then I'd be like a month into it and be like, everything hurts, fuck this, I'm never lifting heavy again. Let me get back and do the fun sport performance stuff, fun for me type of more general training. But if people can have that, if you get up to doing maybe 30 minutes of some kind of cardio activity, like I always really like the tempo type of stuff, which is a track and field adaptation from Charlie Francis. But for powerlifters, I'll have them do it on the bike or pushing a sled, going about 70% maximum output for 30 to 40 second intervals, and then taking the rest of that minute, 20 to 30 seconds as a recovery, and then doing another 30 to 40 second interval of like a low level calisthenic or a corrective exercise or abs. So essentially, I'll go 30. I do 45 on, 15 off, but 45 on the air bike at about 350 watts for me is that 70-ish% output. Easy enough. You can just go all out for a bit and then see what that is, and then multiply it by 0.7 and know the pace you should go at. So I'll go 45 seconds like that, 15 seconds to transition, then 45 seconds of like side plank or something, 15 seconds to transition back to the bike, abs, bike, upper back correctives, bike, low back, stability exercise, just back and forth like that for, now because I'm not focused on powerlifting training for myself, I'll go to like 30, 40 minutes like that. For powerlifters, 20 minutes would be great. The first week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, it might feel like, man, this is really hard. You're going to adapt to it. It's going to be fine. Once you've been having that in, if you've been doing 30 minutes and then you get to your peaking block, and you're, oh, should I still keep this in? Yeah, it's fine. Just maybe take it down to 20 minutes. Like once you've been doing it, it's not a hard thing if you're doing it properly to keep in your training. It's just going to be a little bit tough in the introduction of it. But I'd also encourage people there to think beyond the context of, powerlifting meets and the, various swords and battle axes and cheap medals that you may be able to win there, and think about the broader context of living your life. I say this as a super heavyweight powerlifter, but that definitely became a realization for me in powerlifting. It was like, there's more to life than lifting these pieces of metal attached to the other piece of metal. I want to, live past 50. So.
Yeah, I think you definitely alluded to quite a few different protocols that are pretty simple to implement. And I think the one thing that a lot of the times I hear people say is exactly what you said. They're just like, man, I'm so banged up. And I'm like, well, what'd you start doing? Like, well, I started doing some HIIT. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? Like, why don't you just start with something simple like walking, and then maybe also not necessarily pairing the intervention to like what they're currently doing in their training as well. So, they'll go for a run before they have like a heavy day on squats or something like that. It's like, okay, well, maybe you shouldn't go for a run, especially if you haven't done it before. So maybe like just a simple walk on flat ground for like X amount of time, and then what your baseline aerobic fitness is at, how many steps you're getting in a day, and then kind of scaling from there instead of just assuming that, oh, well, the goal is to be 8,000 steps a day, and so let's just get 8,000 steps. And it's like, okay, well, you started at like less than 1,000, so maybe we shouldn't, take like an 800% increase in, work right off the bat. As stupid as that sounds, but I mean, like for a lot of people, it is a kind of a big thing. But yeah, no, I think you brought up some really, really great points, especially for building up the fitness and kind of sustaining that into the peak as well. I've definitely noticed that, like, since I've been walking everywhere and cycling and going for like regular hikes and stuff like that, my recovery just even between sets is like drastically different. Like, I don't even mean like, oh yeah, I noticed a little bit different. It's like I catch my breath way quicker. I'm not like sweating a bunch. I can bounce back so much faster. It's like night and day difference. And so I completely agree with
yeah, I think underutilized thing for people too, especially in early phases or off-season phases, is being strict with themselves on timing the rest period. And it's not even that it has to be like really short, challenging time. Just use a stopwatch, and if you said it's going to be 3 minutes, make it 3 minutes, and stick to that, and then move quick between accessory stuff and just make yourself huff and puff a little bit there. Like it's might make it in the very short term, you're gonna have to use 5 less pounds or whatever, but in the long term you're going to be so much more fit. That's something that I've not really dealt with until early in my second, third, and fourth powerlifting meets. Josh Bryant coached me, and he was big on that. Like,
Strong?
Huh?
Is that the Jailhouse Strong guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we do like a top set of deadlifts and then all these back down sets on like 1 minute rests. And the first day it was the hardest workout I'd ever done, I'd ever imagined. I remember looking at it on the paper and like column. I was like, is this real? Like, you want me to do this? It was insane. I think I did like maybe 585 for a triple, then 50 or 495 for 6 sets of 4 with 1 minute rest, and then deficit deadlifts, and then bent over rows and shrugs and all this stuff. But the 6x4 with 1 minute rest, the first set 1 minute rest, the next one maybe 65 seconds. And then by the last 2 sets, I was just like, I'm resting 3-4 minutes. But I go through that whole training cycle, which was brutal, super hard, made an 85-pound deadlift PR, but then came back to the next training cycle and 1 minute rest the whole way through with a little bit heavier weights, no problem. Yeah, being strong, it's hard work. You gotta push yourself there, and I think that that's a way to really effectively, get some really specific work capacity built up. And then for me, when I switched to training strongman or competing in strongman, I'd done all these short rest period powerlifting stuff. So I go train with some guys who had just trained strongman, and they're like, "Oh, this is going to be tough crossing over from powerlifting to conditioning." And I was like, "We'll see who it's tough for." But yeah, so it had me really prepared there, and now I do jiu-jitsu and all that stuff. So we do a lot of short. I do a lot of short rest period. I pretty much time all my rest periods, whether it's in what we call a bridge block, is like this off-season kind of plan that you use, or even just my normal training. I'll time everything, and I get past like 3 minutes on something. I was like, wow, this really seems like a long time now.
Yeah, it's funny. Honestly, I think a lot of the stuff that people sort of have adopted as these like foundational tenets of like strength training are more so based out of convenience a lot of the times, where it's like cardio makes you weak, or cardio does this, or whatever, or like high reps is not that great. And I'm like, well, I don't know, man. All the old school powerlifters are pretty damn huge and jacked, so pretty sure they didn't just get that way doing like 1 to 3 reps at 85%. I mean, maybe some of them did, but most probably didn't.
Yeah. I always think, and this is a total tangent, that it's interesting about these older Don Reinhardt, John Cole type of era, 1970s guys who had these really long-standing records, and thinking about the bigger context of their lives, it was probably a much more rural existence, just in general. Everyone was living a more rural, more manual labor type of life. Like, I grew up in the suburbs in Orange County, California. My mom is from a farm in northern Minnesota, a town of about 150 people. And my grandpa, he was strong as shit doing farm work. And it's like, if you are, and I don't know this specifically for Don Reinhardt or John Cole or anyone, but let's say if you're a young Don Reinhardt type and you're growing up on a farm, or you have to walk everywhere, or just playing outside more, or you're helping, he's a little kid helping his dad with whatever chores and manual labor type of work tasks, and someone does that from you work 2 hours a day on the farm from 8 to 18, and then you start lifting weights, versus someone who just starts lifting weights when they're 18 after a relatively sedentary existence. You can't catch up with that 10 years of general GPP that they've built there. So I think that probably went a really long way for a lot of those older time guys in their general work capacity.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, that whole expression of like the farm boy strong type thing. One of the things that I wanted to I guess get your feedback on is, I know you trained a lot on your own, and when I first started strength training, I trained a lot on my own as well, and I got like pretty good results. But then I remember when I started training with like a crew who was a lot stronger than me. I remember the first day that I walked in, I saw someone. I walked into this new powerlifting club, and it was like a private club. And I literally walked in, and there was a guy facing me, like the door, unracking 805. And I was like, oh, shit. Okay. Like, I'd never seen that in real life, and I had been plateaued probably for like 6 months. And then after like, I think maybe 1 or 2 months of training there, I hit like a 50-pound PR on almost every lift. And I attribute a lot of that to just like seeing that stuff. And I mean, probably also like just not pushing myself hard enough, because I thought like I didn't recalibrate where my actual limits were. And so I wanted to kind of get your perspective on like how important is your training environment? And then if you are someone who trains from home because of work constraints or whatever it might be, how can you make sure that you're actually getting to a high enough output, um, and you're not sort of like shortchanging yourself? Because you can still be making, some progress, but when you go in and someone actually sees that and they're like, that's not an RPE 8, you need to add like another 30, 40 pounds. And they're doing that every single day. So yeah, if you could just kind of touch on that, that'd be great.
Yeah, so part of what you were saying there is kind of like the perception of what is good or what is possible. I think that's has been a significant thing. Whether it's a 4-minute mile, more in the strength context of things like the first 400-pound log press in strongman. All these guys were bumping up against it, and then one dude did it, and then it was like 2 months later, 10 guys had done it. They didn't all of a sudden get that much stronger. Or even for myself and strongman particularly. I remember my second contest. I'd been doing strongman for 5 weeks at this point. I had a 975 yoke, and I'd been watching all these older World's Strongest Man, and I think it was a Fortissimus show was like the first time they'd done 900-pound yoke, and this was maybe 5 years before this contest I was doing. And I'm watching Cedric Savickas, 3 steps drop, 2 steps drop, and I'm like, and I'm supposed to do more than this, more than Savickas. And I went 975 for 25 meters or whatever it was, no drops. And I think it was just really the expectation, like, well, this is the weight you have to do. This is the contest, so do it. That does have that once seeing stuff like that, and as it changes your perception of what you can do, what's possible, can be really significant. The internet has broken down a lot of those barriers, and I think that's why you see this huge acceleration in the best lifts, the deadlift, more so than anything. Where 2015, a 900-pound deadlift was, you were breaking American records, doing that kind of stuff, and now not that much past that. It's 1,000 and 1,000 plus, and guys are doing 500 kilos and training and all this stuff. So I think that perception issue, as long as you are willing to seek out that information online and see these people are doing that, so it's possible to be done, maybe negates some of the need to walk in and to a gym with stronger people and see how much stronger they are. Like, if someone wants to live in denial and not go on open powerlifting and not see that how much stronger people are in their weight class, or they want to make whatever excuses about genetics or drugs or whatever of why it's happening, well, that person's not going to be very strong anyways. So once the perception is aside, because you can understand what is possible from seeing it online, then it becomes a thing of are you pushing yourself hard enough? In terms of a RPE rating, like that single small context, just like one set. Yeah, I mean, that's something that probably like an online coach or whatever can help with, or different groups and all that. Being discerning about who you're listening to is significant, certainly. For me, I said I pretty much always trained by myself. In starting back in high school, training for football and track, like I wrote my own program my whole life, with the exception of Josh coaching me for those couple meets and a little bit of college strength and conditioning coach my first 2 years of school. But people would come and they'd train for a little bit and they'd fall off, and that was it. And that was it even in the training strongman a lot of times. So I was trained by myself. I just kind of was able to look at, well, this is what you did before, and now we're going to do 5 pounds more or 10 pounds more than the last time around, or one set more. So I was always kind of focused inward in that regard. Advice, I guess I'd have for people who want to be successful in training by themselves is, at the end of the day, like, you're doing all this stuff for yourself. It's not for, to impress your training partners or to impress the internet. So if you can do it to a standard that you're proud of and that you feel like that you've challenged yourself and can continue doing that, then it's going to be something you're able to be successful with. Not everyone will be able to be successful probably training by themselves, but I guess you kind of just got to figure out if you're that person who can do it or not. Like I never really trained. I never really trained with a group here or there, but it's easier to train hard with a group and you're all pushing each other, but there's different dynamics that come in with that as well that I think can be negative in some regards of going heavier than you're supposed to in certain situations and not working within the context of the plan or doing more ego type of things, and that all depends on the group that you're with too, because you could be getting great feedback from people. But if you have the opportunity to get around people more experienced than you, even if it's not all the time, it's gonna be worth it from time to time to get that. But end of the day, you're doing it because you want to do it. So hold yourself accountable for it.
The injury thing's a really good point, because even here at the gym, we got this new treadmill. I can't remember what they're called, but it's kind of like the U-shaped ones that are self-propelling.
Yep.
So we got them, and I was like, oh, this is really awesome, because now I can do my steps inside, and I don't have to walk when it's like sleet and ice and all this stuff, right? To get my step count in. And one of the guys was like, oh, let's see who can hit like max speed or whatever. And I was like, So he's doing it, and he's like, oh, why don't you do it, you pussy? And I'm like, look, you can call me whatever you want. I was like, I haven't like ran in a long time, and I haven't sprinted in years.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna fucking sprint and like blow out my quad or my hamstring or something like that because you're teasing me. And he kept bugging me, and I was like, oh, whatever, I don't care, do whatever you want. And then a couple other people jumped on and did it, and then sure enough, he ended up hurting his adductor. And I was like, I told you. I was like, this is exactly the reason why I didn't want to do it. It's not worth the risk, And so like those little things like that definitely can get you if you're not like, I don't know, if you don't have your priorities straight sometimes. But
Yeah.
So we are coming up
to that effect. Just real quick, I think sometimes people only take the idea of working hard or working as hard as they can as the context of doing as much as they can. But there's a lot of times where working hard is really more about the discipline of doing what you are supposed to do, what you need to do. And sometimes that means doing less, means sticking to the plan. It means doing the things that aren't fun, like 10 extra pounds on the bar or an extra set or something, but the discipline of getting the most out of less sets, but by being better focused and all that kind of stuff, or the recovery things around that, going to bed earlier, eating the right stuff, all that. So that's an important thing for people to understand too, that working the hardest doesn't always mean doing the most.
Yeah, 100%. So we are coming up on that hour mark, and let's see, where can people find you?
Yeah, so find me at Chad Wesley Smith is my personal Instagram, at Juggernaut Training, Juggernaut Training Systems YouTube, jtsstrength.com, juggernautai.app, also at juggernautai.app, Instagram for just that. Find the Juggernaut AI app in the App Store, Google Play Store, but we prefer if you sign up through the website, so we don't have to pay Apple or Google anymore than we already do. So all of those places.
Awesome. So I'll also link those two books in the comment section, or sorry, not the comment, in the show notes. So all of that stuff, the Instagram, the website, Juggernaut AI, and the books are going to be in the show notes. Make sure you go give him and Juggernaut a follow. Puts out a lot of great stuff on a regular basis, and just has a ton of content on YouTube as well, which actually I'll probably put in there as well, that you guys can check out. So Chad, thanks so much for jumping on, man. It was really great chatting.
Cool. My pleasure, Daniel.